Welcome to the acclaimed podcast, The Deep Dive, featuring your esteemed hosts, Andy Monitor and Drew Dinzik, powered by BetSperts.
Welcome to The Deep Dive, Andy. We have talked to a lot of smart people over the balance of this preparation for football season, and the content we've covered, I feel like we have done an absolutely sterling job of really giving the NFL as much possible shine as is possible. But we haven't talked a lick of college football, and lo and behold, I look on the calendar. We are a week away from Week 0 kickoff, which means I'm behind. And we reached out to some of our smart friends across the industry. We're like, hey, who should we reach out to for college? Anyone you really want to hear from? And got resounding positive feedback about today's guest making his first ever appearance on the Deep Dive at the Tailgate Tent. Gary, welcome to the Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me, guys. As they say on the Feinbaum show, long-time listener, first-time caller. So I'm glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, Drew alluded to that a little too. You've been around forever, and I mean, I never did just get to say thanks for. I had a Burrow ticket at 100. Like I didn't get
Joe
the
Burrow
absolute,
originator.
Yeah, I didn't get the absolute bomb, but I mean that was one of those two where, and I've told this story 100 times, where it was at a book that had a cash out button. And I'm like, I'll just hit that before the Alabama game, and then they didn't offer it anymore. Like they just, the button wasn't there that week. I'm like, fuck, I guess I'm riding this out. And
it's fate.
yeah, I was just like,
jokes on you
assholes. I was gonna hit the button.
I keep thinking, like, at some point I might want to change my avatar, but I don't know if I'm ever going to find a better one.
No, that was all time. And I mean, the fact that he's translated it to immediate NFL success makes it that much sweeter, frankly. It's very, very cool. If people don't know what we're talking about, of course, you had 200 to 1 on Burrow to Heisman when people, when he was not a household name, led LSU to probably one of the most superlative college football seasons that I can remember. And just crazy to look at in hindsight, because the program itself is now in shambles. And it was not that long ago that they were, beating up the world. They could have scored 80 on Oklahoma in the semifinals that day if they felt like it. It was quite a cool run. But it's fair to call you basically like a full-on college football originator, right?
Yeah, I would say at this point, I kind of span a lot of different, I would say, hats in the college football landscape. I definitely would call myself an originator. I would say, I do have a little bit of a service business, and then, I'm not so underground or locked up as an originator that I don't try and share, things that I find, stats, nuggets on Twitter for the general population. And we'll kind of get into why I do that and why I think that. But yeah, I would say, one of the hats I wear is at this point an originator.
I love it. Well, that's most of who we want to try to reach out to here. We've had folks on, like our buddy Suma, who like lives and breathes NFL. Like when the season's over, other than the draft, he's just in hibernation. Is that the way it goes for you in college football, or do you have sort of a year-round, gig where you rotate from college into other sports, or even, moving for other people in the industry, or have, relationships industry-wide? Or is this like college football is your passion, and that's, you're zeroed in from 365 days a year?
Yeah, I don't originate any other sports at all. And I mean, I think that's for a couple reasons. It's just the market, at least college football, and I think probably most gambling markets at this point are just so efficient with the flow of information that it's really hard to, at least in my opinion, feel like you can have an actual edge if you really aren't focusing all of your energy in one particular area. I mean, college football is now 131 FBS teams, unless you're just a volume player playing a number like your PRs and just doing that and not really making adjustments, throughout the week as things come out. I think it's just challenging. I think it's hard to feel as though, you have all the information and you're making good decisions if, your focus is split between college football and getting ready for college basketball season or capping the NBA or whatever it is you do. I try and rely on others. I think in this industry, if you do the right thing and can be helpful to other people, if you want to get down in other places, you generally can find that information. But I mean, for me, by the time college football is over, and even during the season, like I don't even want to watch the NFL by the time Sunday comes around. I have enough work I have to do from Saturday, but also I'm so burnt out of watching football that I need a day. And when season's over, I try and shut it down for a little bit.
That makes total sense. And in real, I mean, Andy, I know you're this.
Yeah,
way
I mean,
too.
and
Like,
talking about Summa too, it's wild. Like,
can't do both.
there's so much stuff going on. Yeah, and like that's why I don't bet college, because I don't have the bandwidth, and my family would kill me too. Like that's just part of the deal. Like I don't even watch that much college. I told this to producer Dan the other day. I said during the season I watch more college football during the week than I do on a Saturday, because I basically just take Saturdays off of like being a person who watches and bets on sports constantly. So that's like my family day to give back to the fans. You guys have me today. But the Summa thing too has always blown my mind. How he's just solely focused on NFL. Guy lives in Europe, doesn't even bet soccer and tennis. Like that stuff's way more popular. He's like a huge SL4 fan. It's wild. Like I've found too that golf and NFL are like a nice balance, because you don't have to give a shit about golf in the fall when there's the bad tournaments after the playoffs are done, and you don't really have to care about some of the stuff early on in the season. But like once football's over, it's like, oh, now we're down in Phoenix, and then you can go through the end of the playoffs, and all of a sudden it's football. That's a nice balance. But even like college basketball, man, once college basketball starts and I'm working on football, it's like there's not enough hours in the day. Like I feel like I should be better at both. Maybe I should just stop betting one of them. That wouldn't be any fun.
It's hard. I was talking to someone today who bets way more sports than I do, and I was like, I don't know how you do this. It's just I have one sport. Granted, there's 130 teams. College basketball is like triple that. I don't understand how people can bounce, as quickly from one to the other. And what Summa does, in NFL, I think is even that much more impressive, because there's way less teams, but you still to find an edge in arguably the most mature market outside of, global equity and fixed income markets is even all the more impressive. So, it's still a pretty crazy industry, and you can continue to learn from different people every day,
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, it goes back to sort of the saying, "Jack of all trades, master of none." Like you just have to specialize. If you're going to level up, if you're going to, if you're going to be a limit player, if you're going to originate at, the highest level, you can't be divided attention. And I mean, there are definitely some trade-offs, right? Like I don't know, I didn't prep you for this question, but I've talked to other people who originate college football, and I think it lends itself to having an especially strong prior, right? Like if you can come into the season with a prior that's better than market average, you're going to, you're going to nuke the first handful of weeks. And then, the market eventually catches up to you, and okay, well now it's time to, pivot to college basketball. Like I know players like that, and that makes sense just because, you're making a lot of the hay early in the season. You're not really afforded that opportunity in the NFL because the adjustments happen real quick. But I think is that sort of your general approach in terms of trying to hit the softest stuff early in the season, or are you the kind of person that can pivot to different angles and continue through bowl season at about the same clip in terms of just expected ROI?
It's a good question. I think in my mind, they're almost completely different seasons when you think about it. So I'll get more into how I think about, I guess, the game of football and handicapping it. But what I use early in the season is 100% priors. And then I look at what the game would have been, and let's just call it week 13 of the prior season. And then my thought process is, what's changed? Are there new coaches? What is the new personnel like? And if I would have thought this team would have scored 27 against, their opponent, is that going to go up or down? Right. And why? So I think ultimately early season, what I would attribute the most success is obviously having a good handle on where the team was when the prior season ended and making whatever adjustments. But it ultimately comes down, I think it sounds so easy, but to hard work and digging for information and just knowing that, okay, you know, Nevada's lost, they have 4 returning starters. They just lost 2 in the last 24 hours. You know, how are you going to adjust the number in their week 1 matchup against New Mexico State? It's things like that maybe people that are focusing on other sports are not solely focusing on, you know, college football in particular. They might miss something like that, or just may not be as attuned to, you know, what happened in the first 4 weeks of football, and then what happens once you hit conference play, and then what happens towards the end of the season. I have a system where as you get more data and more numbers, ultimately my number gets closer to what I think is a better number. So early on, it's kind of a little bit more of an art and a science, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
And it's true. And, you know, as we've progressed to, God, I'd sound like an old nerd from like 20, you know, like the year to the information superhighway.
You look like an old nerd, too.
Yeah, I do look like an old nerd. But, you know, as we've progressed to, I mean, information moves so much faster now. And it's like, it's probably an advantage to people who have the time, the bandwidth, and the knowledge and the connections to make those, you know, keep up with it fast enough and adjust fast enough. But at the same time, like, and I really think maybe it's a little heavier in college basketball with the transfer stuff has been awful, but like it didn't used to be this way either with transfers, coaching changes, and, you know, guys coming in out of the program. Like even, you know, you said there is like 350 goddamn college basketball teams. It's impossible to do that sort of stuff unless you're a full-timer or head of staff. But even with college football, there's so much going on and changes over the course of the summer that you got to keep up with. And then, I mean, like some of the guys that we, you know, again, you talk about maybe betting into other people's stuff because it's not your specialty. We do that with college football because it's not our specialty. But some of those guys, I mean, they're talking about like, hey, this player, and this player's out. I'm like, I don't even like. I can't even remember what conference that team is in. And
well, it's a lot. I mean, I think that's the.
Yeah, and that's the stuff they're betting on. Yeah, that is the edge. That's the edges they're finding, and it's all informational. It feels like at this point.
Well, when I have like these other, you know, well, here's another problem is I think there's just way less originators in the market because of how much information is flowing. You do have to rely on other people and other parts. So you do have just it seems like a large part of the market that's really betting on almost like, you know, 5 to 10 people's numbers, which is part of the problem. I'm not saying it makes the market more efficient, but it makes it feel like the market's more efficient. But I have a lot of these originators or people I talk to a lot, like, oh, this portal, it's really bothering me. I'm on the other hand, I'm like, I love this. This is great for me because it gives me now an edge that generally no one else is going to have. If you can assess the portal, figure out how XYZ player is going to fit onto a team and impact that team. So the more of that stuff for me, I know it's a headache to what I would say is, you know, the people that still, you know, allocate to college football, but maybe it's not their sole focus. To me, it's the complete opposite. Like the more chaos generally for someone that focuses on it, I think should be better.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a great way to put a bow on a point that I wanted to try to make or ask at least. And that is like, there's 2 general approaches you can take to coming up with a number for a game. You can do a top down, which is basically, this is a team level. I say there's a lot of top down, bottom up means different things depending on who you're talking to. But when it comes to originating, if you're doing a top down origination, you're basically just using team level stats to try to come up with a fair price. If you're going bottom up, you're basically using player level information to build what you think is a fair price. And it seems like you almost have to do that for college football because the pieces change so much. You only have 11 games, 12 games, whatever the number of games is of a regular season. It's a super small sample size. So is basically you're more or less forced to go bottom up in terms of coming up with what you think a fair for a given team is?
And this might be maybe one of the hotter takes I have, and maybe you guys have seen me say this. I am so against general PRs, which I think is what a lot of us would think of as like the top-down approach to handicapping really any sport, but in particular football, college football. I don't think the puzzle of football has really been solved, and I don't know if it ever will. Like, you know, Bob stopped betting basketball because he thought that the NBA, essentially the edge disappeared. Baseball, that happened to players 15, 20 years ago, in some regard. I think in football, you have 22 independent players doing different things, and then you only have 12 games. So your sample size is inherently smaller, and the data, while it's getting better, isn't there like we have in basketball and, let's say, baseball. So I think the way I think about coming up with a number is, what is an offense versus defense going to look like on both sides of the ball, right? So to give you an idea of how the PRs would maybe match up. So, if you think about two teams last year that maybe were similar in PRs, like, I don't know, Michigan State and Baylor at one point were probably pretty similar in PRs, maybe not at the end of the year, but they were, I would imagine, halfway through the year when Michigan State was undefeated and Baylor was like, okay, this isn't the same team that was 3-9 in 2020. Those teams, if they played Ohio State, by PR numbers would have the same spread. But the way those teams match up and their stats match up to how they would defend Ohio State's offense and then also try and score on Ohio State's defense are completely different. So I start with, and this started probably 15, 20 years ago when I first started building a system of what happens when these two teams play each other and what is the projected outcome if you run this game 1,000 different times, right? And then from there, that kind of is my top down, gives me an area to focus at least, on the onset when the lines come out. Then for me, it becomes bottoms up, right? So if that game, let's say it's going to be 31-21 based on the 1,000 trials, keep in mind the standard deviation of football is extremely high. So what can come in and then cause these things maybe not to happen, right? So is there personnel issues? Is there weather issues? There's a reason why my numbers are maybe higher or lower? If it's projecting 2.3 passing touchdowns, do I adjust that to 3? Do I keep that 2? Do I leave it at 2.5 and kind of meet in the middle? So I think you have to have a bottoms up approach, or at least I don't know if I would trust someone that just said, well, I make, Ohio State 93 and Baylor and Michigan State each 80. So, it's a 13-point spread against both those teams. I just can't believe that to be the case. So I think you have to have a bottoms up
We do
approach.
a little of that. And I think we talked about that a couple weeks ago in one of the previews with NFL. We both do a little of that as well, too, because it's you have an even bigger sample of teams and a way wider variety of styles of play in college football than the NFL, I'd say. And to your, like a real simplified example is, there's a bunch of different ways to get a team to the same power ranking. And, again, if, your example is weather is probably even better than the one that I was going to bring up. Like, hey, this team is power ranked this and the other team's power ranked that. And it comes up with a -3. But the favorite's an air raid with an over-the-top offense, and there's 50-mile-an-hour winds, and it's raining sideways. Like that number isn't, the number isn't the same. And then,
Right.
The same thing goes with, two teams that are power ranked the same, and one has a really, really strong run game against last year's Chargers. Like, are you avoiding that team where actually they have this decent advantage, one positional group against another? There's always subjective things that we'll throw in, usually just at the group level like that. But I mean, even to your point and Drew's point about player level stuff, this power ranking maybe isn't going to be adjusted yet if there's some suspensions or injuries or something. But here or there, a linebacker's missing that matters. A coverage linebacker's missing against a team that's able to take advantage of that. You do have to go. If you just black box it off numbers here, nobody's going to have a good time.
So can I ask a couple questions about sort of the originating landscape and the information side of things? So let's say that there's like a 5-star guy. He goes into the transfer portal because it just didn't work out at his first spot. He lands in a new system. You create an opinion like, okay, wow. Like this guy was 5-star. He played like 2-star. But his fit here is so much better. Like this is going to be electric, right? Do you feel like you have to kind of find unique ways to get a bet down on that type of edge, because anyone else that's sort of doing things that way or paying attention to that level of detail on a given player and how they would fit, like are you racing to the same tiny edge and trying to get it in before it evaporates, or is that kind of such a small example, and it's more of a composite of the parts when it's all said and done that you really need to be able to have some edge between teams.
I would love to, sit here and brag and say that I'm at the point where, individual players I've quantified to the point where I know that whatever, if this player is going to be in or this player is going to be out, and this is how it's going to affect the outcome. But I'm not necessarily at that point. I am at the point where I am rating individual players and how much better they are than who's stepping in. But from an origination standpoint, I think for me, it ultimately goes to, if I project in a certain game that, Oregon's going to have 0.52 rushing touchdowns against Georgia, and, for whatever reason, you hear that Georgia's front seven is struggling early or late in fall camp, and then they get an injury and game prep. Maybe I would adjust that. That would affect me is I would probably adjust that number up from maybe 0.5 all the way up to, okay, I can assume that they're probably going to score one rushing touchdown against Georgia, right? So for me, it comes in more in the qualitative side of things like that. I'm not necessarily betting that edge, into the market based on a player. And I still don't necessarily believe, I think certain players can affect the market in college football, but I think it's still pretty, far and few between.
Interesting. How about
multiple? Like it has to be someone really important, or like even maybe not even a cluster injury at a positional group, but 2 or 3 guys spread across all layers of the defense. Stuff like that'll start to matter. But
we've heard about a couple of those.
It's so hard to say like this person is worth points to the line if it's not a quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've created
everybody knows
like
about
almost
those.
like
no one's that's not going under the radar when a top 10 quarterback is like halfway injured.
Yeah, I think the bigger edge for me is I've created what I would call like a war for college football players. So if a random offensive lineman is out, how much better than an average offensive lineman is that person? Sure. And where is the person that's coming in rank? So I have those types of things that I think just help me quantify that ultimately then drive me into the qualitative. Here's where my numbers are. How do I want to adjust it?
No, that makes total sense. Do you notice some players or some groups, or even maybe the biggest group out there that's been in college football, largely acting on information? Like when you see a move like that, or you catch wind of a release, is your first instinct like, I'm going to go figure out what's going on here because it's most certainly information based?
I mean, for the most part, like I said, the origination crew at this point for almost all sports has gotten so small that I don't even need to really know what's happened to look at this screen and probably have a pretty good idea of who it was that moved on whatever the number was. And then it becomes, Ohio State moved today slightly. I'm guessing someone updated their numbers on what Notre Dame's offense is going to look like with all these injuries that they have, and are sitting there saying, okay, we're still at 15.5. We're probably not going to get the 4 or whatever we were, 14.5. We're probably not going to get the 14 flat that we wanted. Let's go ahead and take this before it ends up at 17. I'm guessing that's what someone moved on. So I don't think, at least from, this is once again an assumption, I wouldn't move on injury information. That stuff, for the most part, unless you have inside information, which sometimes you're privy to, that stuff, is already normally priced in, or the game gets pulled before anyone gets a chance to really move it, if people are paying attention.
That's where we are at in the loop. And granted, we're probably ahead of some people just because we know people who are privy to some information, but every once in a while it's like there's a big college move, and then you see the news like 2-3 hours later. It's like, man, who's getting this so quick? Like how do they, they just, they have to know somebody at the school or close, or I don't know if trainers are getting paid at this point to give groups information. I wouldn't.
Yeah, maybe it's beat writers.
Yeah, that too.
That's probably.
Some of these small schools too. It's, people are like I'm not saying people have, DM people on Instagram and like, hey, you write for the school paper, or we think you might date this quarterback and stuff like that. But like, some of the small school stuff is super hard to get, and we've seen some unique ways to try to get that info. And again, it's wild. It's like, man, is that guy really that important? Because it's hard to fathom.
Andy, we need to task you with creating like a Baywatch male lifeguard Instagram so you can DM all the guys' girlfriends and try and get intel.
Yeah, there you go.
You'd be the second one. You'd be the second one to. You'd be the second one to do it. Let me ask you about the non-Power 5, then small schools. Like, do you mostly stick to sort of the teams that you would consider major market, or do you like are there bigger edges to find as you kind of dive into the non-Power 5?
I think it's kind of like almost in a way a circular reference in the sense of, I think the edges are probably bigger. In fact, they are bigger, but finding the information to feel confident in your number is also a lot more challenging for a lot of those schools. Like, Louisiana Monroe gets like 1 or 2 articles written about them a week in season. So, unless you're really, really in tune with someone local, it becomes challenging to really, either feel confident in your number that the stats are spitting out. And if you do feeling confident in, do you adjust it? Do you not adjust it? What's going on there? I have no idea. A lot of times with the G5 schools, you'll do all the research you can, pretty much read every single article, every single tweet, feel confident in a number, and then they start a different quarterback that week. And it's like, how did this not, how did you not find this out? And you're doing all the research you can, and sometimes that's just the nature of the beast. So while I think there's probably a little bit of a bigger edge there, it also is a lot more challenging to really, I think, do the proper due diligence to make sure that, what you're betting on is consistent with what's going to happen on the field, whether it's good or bad. You just want to make sure that what you see is going to be representative. It's hard.
Yeah. It harkens back to like me with college basketball. There's a big, and somebody actually pushed back on this, which is scary because he's a better than I am. But at the low levels, and I'm talking, schools that are not even, like some of these aren't even D2 college football schools, but they have a college basketball program, and the SWAC and the MEAC and stuff like that. Most of those guys on the roster don't matter, but there are teams where it's like, hey, this guy they legitimately have the best player in the conference, and he might be out tonight. And you can look until you're blue in the face sometimes and not find anything. There's just nothing on it. And eventually you just had I think about like, how much was I going to bet on this game? Should I still be spending time at this point? Should I just give up and bet some other games? Because some of those schools are so small, and those are the kind of basketball schools where the games don't start on time because they play the girls' game first. The women's team, the women's team will play first, and the men's game. If the women's game goes long, the men's game doesn't start on time.
Yeah. See, for me, I do well at both, but I generally actually do better in P5 versus P5 and in conference, because you tend to have either all the information or the same amount of information, whether it's, Oregon versus Georgia or, Toledo versus Western Michigan for both of those. But the Power 5, when there is all the information, your numbers are representative and you can adjust them appropriately. I actually tend to do a little bit better in those spots. But I still, to this day, people say, what do you think the biggest edge is in college football? And I think strength of schedule and figuring out how to quantify that is still the answer.
Wow. Interesting. But this all makes sense. And in college basketball, you can go top down. In fact, you have to if you're out in the SWAC. But if you're trying to bet SWAC numbers or make SWAC numbers, you have to go top down. But the idea of, and I was curious your thoughts. This is great, a very interesting answer, because it makes sense. Like if you have stronger numbers, if the variability around those is tighter, then your range of outcomes is still going to be, you're going to have a broader edge on a given side or total than you would if your range of outcomes is enormous, because it's two programs that you're like, I don't know, a bunch of 1-star guys, maybe one guy plays like a 2-star guy. This is tough to come up with a fare for that. But so that makes sense. But So kind of pivoting to the Power Five, then we have kind of entered a weird world here with the name, image, likeness, where what was already a very concentrated set of schools that realistically had a chance at national titles has become even more concentrated. Do you think, is that a fair statement, the way you look at sort of the state of college football, or like it always has been that way, it always will be that way, and anyone that makes a big deal out of that is just has their head in the sand?
Yeah, I mean, I go back and forth on this, right? Like, I don't want to say a purist on the playoffs, but last year I'm originally from Cincinnati, and the entire season was like, they don't deserve to be in the playoffs. There's 5 teams that I think have a better chance of, progressing in the playoffs than they do. And I think that's still generally the case, that it's been probably the last 20 years. I think maybe that LSU team that won the national championship was the lowest AP rated team to win a national championship. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's like over the last 15 years entering the season. And generally they say 8 teams, that can win the national championship in a given year. I think that number's probably smaller than that, but every once in a while you will get one of those LSU type of situations where everything clicks and the recruits that at one point were 5 stars that didn't play like it for 3 years start playing like it. So in the NIL in the NIL era, I do agree with you that it's probably still, and it maybe has narrowed a tiny bit. I think we're still in the infancy stages of it as these teams kind of get their collectives together. I think there probably will, in the next 5 years, still be like 8 teams that are spending significantly more than anyone. And, if we want to expand to a 16 team playoff, we're still going to get the same outcome, in my opinion. But, if it sells more TV dollars, I'm sure that's what we're going to do. But yeah, I think I'm with you that it's, for now, probably a little bit narrower, but I think it'll probably go back once this collective thing gets all figured out at the big schools, back to like 6 to 8 teams that can realistically win.
I landed on narrow. I looked at it, and again, I didn't spend a lot of time. I didn't even order a Phil Steele. I just looked at it from like who's back and what do I know about these teams. I'm like, Christ, there's only 2 teams maybe. We might be in the era of there's 2 teams right now, and they probably just end up playing each other. And you talk about a bigger playoff, shit. We might not need the semifinals again. There hasn't been that.
We normally don't.
Yeah, there haven't been that many good semifinals.
Well, there's not a lot of upsets. I mean, I think
it's normally the 4th place team. New Year's Eve.
Georgia, Oklahoma was a fun game, and I'm trying to think of another one.
Who did Clemson beat? Clemson beat Ohio State in that semifinal that was decent? No.
Yeah, I don't even. I mean, it's generally, we know. And I think you guys probably have an idea. I think this year there's probably 3, maybe 4 teams, if everything clicks right for Clemson, that can win it, and if not, then if Bryce Young and Stroud stay healthy, and it's probably gonna be one of Ohio State or Alabama. I mean, that's how it is every year. I just think, between the media and wishful thinking, we want to think that other teams actually have a chance when we kind of innately know the answer. We just don't want to admit it.
So when it comes
even like last year when people were like, oh, Cincinnati, all they have to do is get in and then anything can happen. Like, I don't know. I don't know if that's a thing.
I mean, COVID was around, so presumably all of
that was the thing you needed to happen. But looking at the other teams that were in, it's like I think they might get boat race. Like, they beat Notre Dame. Like, that's not the same.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
So when it comes to then handicapping something like the Heisman market, where that has turned into an award that goes to the most impactful player on a team that is definitely in the mix to win a championship. I think Lamar Jackson's like the only guy that comes to mind that put up such eye-popping numbers that he won on the basis of individual performance, not Louisville being in the mix for a title. Considering that is now sort of the bar you have to clear, is it basically as simple as like, let's go through the different prices and paths for guys on Bama, Ohio State, and Georgia?
I mean, you're not too far off. I mean, if you think about the numbers, it's a media award. There's just shy of 900 voters at this point. And they generally vote for, well, not generally, I'll give you the exact numbers. 80% of the time in the last 20 years, it's been a quarterback. That's 90% quarterback the last 10 years. I think Devonta Smith was the only one in the last decade that wasn't a quarterback. 80% of them the last 20 years are Big 12 or further east. You know, they're not Pac-12 players. The Pac-12 players we've had were Mariota and then the USC guys back in the day. And then 100% have won 9 games.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And 100% of them won 9 games. And you have to win. 85% of the winners the last 20 years have won 10 games. So really, if you look at win totals and say, okay, who realistically can win 10 games? Who's a quarterback and who's not on the West Coast? And if you're on the West Coast, you probably got to be on USC. You narrow the list pretty well. And then you kind of need to start thinking about, I would say a little bit of it is, all right, let's look at the schedule. How can we see the media getting behind, you know, this type of team, this type of player? And then, you know, you kind of have a market of probably 10 guys at that point.
I'm trying to look. I don't even have that many.
You're not even up to 10?
But no. I was going to say, I usually have like 2 or 3 more than I have right now, but I have
do you
couple.
feel, yeah, I guess,
do you feel like when he was going through those things, I'm like, I could see most of that stuff happening. I
what's
suppose.
you don't need to tell us what you for sure you think there's a value on, but you know, what is sort of the general dead money in the pool? Like we've talked about
anything non-NC State, I suppose.
Yeah,
no,
I mean,
like where does the dead money in the pool come from? It's mostly like teams where people are like, well, they could get into the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's like teams that like it's a really, really exciting player, but they're on a team that has like a 6.5 win total. So like Matt Corral last year was, in my opinion, dead money because even if Ole Miss wins 9 games, they're going to lose to Alabama and they're probably going to lose 2 more games. And the quarterback on Alabama is probably going to have just as good of stats, right? Or this year, I don't want to say it can't happen because I do think the media is trying to change the tune, but there's just too many voters to just vote for the quarterback on the best team. But Will Anderson, you know, I think is generally dead money. I mean, teams know about Will Anderson. They're probably going to double team him. I would imagine there's going to be defensive players on his team that might have better stats than him just because he's going to command such respect from offensive coaches and offensive lines. So, you know, I think things like that, you know, teams that like KJ Jefferson, super exciting player, Arkansas, 7.5 wins. Could they get to 11 wins? I mean, maybe, but probably not. I kind of think the quarterbacks that are exciting on exciting teams are probably where I see the most dead money. And I, you know, don't want to tell people not to bet certain things, but sometimes I'm like, that has a very, very little chance of winning. So that's kind of, I would say,
all of them. Just you start treating it like a parlay. It's like a same game parlay, same season parlay. All the things that you said, all those are like the minimum criteria for a player, and then like all those things have to happen. You start looking at like just start putting, even if you want to get aggressive with it to really try to build yourself up into making a bet that you might not want to make eventually. It's like start putting percentages to those and, you know, start looking, and there, you know, there's going to be a lot of correlation to it. Don't just add it up like parlay math, but come up with an actual, like, what is the percentage chance that we have like an 11 win, you know, Hogs team And, maybe some other things have to happen on teams that there's no control over as well. Like, you can't have massive years from some of the quarterbacks at some of the marquee programs that are going to win their conferences, because otherwise he's just a guy that's on stage. And congrats on your bet, but it didn't quite get there. They don't have each way bets on Heisman. They do have to.
Yeah.
They do have bets eventually to, like, I've seen that, to get on the stage.
Get invited.
Yeah,
we'll get invited.
Get invited or something.
Do you think Bryce Young
it's not
dead
available
money
right now, though.
Bryce Young dead money?
I don't. I mean, I didn't. I mean, this is a unique year. We have two guys that are basically under 3-1, which I agree with that they probably should be. And if I had to pick one, I'd want to bet on Stroud, because I do think Young also last year didn't have typical Heisman-like numbers. If you think back to some of the games, I mean, if he didn't convert a couple fourth downs on that last Auburn drive, he was not winning the Heisman. And his numbers kind of back that up. If there was ever a year to go with a defensive guy, it probably was last year, because there wasn't, it almost was a defaulted award last year, because there was so many people in the race. We had Kenneth Walker for a while in there. We had Jordan Davis was being talked about in like week 10 is winning the Heisman. I mean, that's not normal. I don't know if Young is dead money, but I think if there's someone as good as him, and they, Hendon Hooker, once again, I think he's probably dead money. I really like him. But if he takes Tennessee to, 11-1, and they upset Alabama or LSU or something like, I don't know if it's even going to be an upset against LSU, but like if they win a game like that, and he has as good, if not better numbers, I could see voters getting behind someone like that. So yeah, I would, if you wanted to take one, Stroud or Young, I would lean towards Stroud.
No, that makes all the sense in the world. Staying on Young and Bama for just a second, what constitutes success for Saban at this point besides the national championship? And do you think that in any way influences like how he looks at the balance of the season? Like, now that he knows, like, we can lose some, regulars, we can lose, we have the margin of error where if we get ourselves to the SEC championship and win that game, then we're going to the playoff. Like, does that change at all sort of his kind of outlook on how he treats the season, you think?
I mean, this is just assumption at this point, and
sure,
I think he's an absolute lunatic where he treats every game like he's not thinking like, oh, we're going to take it easy and possibly lose to Georgia here, or let's flip it around. Like Georgia last year, they were undefeated into the SEC championship game. They knew that they could lose to Alabama and still be in the playoffs and miss Alabama in the playoffs likely. Do I think Kirby Smart lost the game on purpose to motivate his team? No. I mean, that seems a little too ridiculous to me. And I think Saban at this point, to answer your question, what constitutes success for me, it has to be national championship or bust. I don't think they care about SEC championships, At this point, he's just trying to add national championships to his legacy.
Going to the Stroud question, then I had for you.
It's so tough too. Like, as far as so many of these award markets are like expectation based. It's crazy, like that. We still have Alabama players. There's usually multiple ones to start the season right away in the top, 5-10 every year. But it's like, man, the expectations is all of it. Win every game, win the title game, and it's crazy just how far. And now the NIL thing isn't going to hurt them either. They've got boosters, baby.
For sure.
It's going to be
that.
That's that, and kind of back to that point. That's been popping around my mind. I'm curious to see, like, because we joked around about that with, Jerry Jones and Arkansas, or like, is there going to be some team, it's not going to be like some MAC team, but is there going to be some team that just has like 2 or 3 uber rich people, like really like billionaire rich, that are going to take this team from like a middle of the pack Power 5 team up into like, this is a team that competes just by giving them a shitload of money for this? Because I think that's fun. I think that's hilarious.
I mean, think about it this way. $1 billion doesn't get you a professional sports organization unless you're a part of an ownership group, right? So what's the next easiest way to really control a team is it's all NIL and putting together a collective that you're in charge of. You control the coach, You control all the players that you get, and if you want to spend the money on it, no one's going to tell you no. And I mean, look at what's happening with Miami right now. I mean, I don't want to say they're a middle of the pack team, but they're like a borderline top 25 team that now has a billionaire that's backing them, and it is Miami. So, you know, they could very easily find themselves back in that top 10 mix, just because I think they have a crazy billionaire donor. Same thing with, I mean, I don't know if you guys saw the SMU collective is coming back. That was, you know, there in like the 80s or whenever that was. So you could very easily see one of these teams, you know, like that all of a sudden is like a top 10 team that it's like, really, is SMU a top 10 football team? Well, you know, I don't know.
It's worked before for them. They've,
Of course.
you know, if anybody's old hat at this, SMU's got it figured out.
I don't have any strong ties to SMU in terms of emotionally wanting them in the mix, but I definitely do for Miami. Like, get me a Miami 4 seed. Yeah, get Clemson out of here. Like, I've had enough Dabo Sweeney for a lifetime. I've had enough Clemson for a lifetime. But get Miami to the top of the ACC. Get them the 4 seed, and let's get an Ohio State Miami semifinal. Like, that would be, for old time's sake, that would just be sick. I would love it.
When was that? Was that 02 or something like that?
02 or 03. Yeah, that was
awesome.
I was way more into college football then, but that was
awesome.
One of the better games of all time. Speaking of Ohio State and CJ Stroud, our presumptive favorite to win the Heisman, is there a path to victory where one of his wide receivers, presumably JSN, snipes that award from him, a la Devontae Smith and Mac Jones?
I mean, what was crazy to me in that season was Mac Jones had better numbers than Joe Burrow had the year before. Yeah. And for whatever reason, Devonta Smith returned a punt. I think it was against Arkansas, like a 90-yard punt or something like that. And then had a couple really good games to finish the season. And that was that with the award. I thought personally that Mac Jones was more deserving of that award than Devonta. On Ohio State, what I think could actually happen is I think you could see the passing game steal votes from each other. I think where you could and think about how Ohio State's going to attack this year. I think Trayvon Henderson, if I were going to take a flyer on Ohio State, would be where I would look. I mean, you're going to have Stroud back, JSN, and arguably they're saying, which is crazy to me because they just had 2 guys drafted in the top 12, that this receiving group is better than last year's.
Incredible.
Teams are going to drop coverage, and you're going to have what he put up numbers like the previous Heisman running backs did last year. It just, people tended to ignore it. I think Henderson, if there's someone in that offense that's going to benefit from all this more than anyone, it could be him. Once again, if you're going a non-QB route, that's probably where I would look.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Did you have Mac Heisman?
I did, yeah.
I had Mac Heisman.
Yeah,
I'm still upset about that. Yeah,
like,
I thought
Mac,
that was
Mac
bullshit.
Jones two times, like the wide receiver Chase now with the rookie of the year.
Yeah, Chase got him. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
like,
I had a preseason, so I was a little. I'm a little biased, and that ended up getting Devonta Smith in season at whatever, like 12-1 or whatever it was at that point. But yeah.
Yeah, we can have a little bonfire in my yard with Mac Jones tickets that didn't.
Yeah,
cash.
Mac wasn't he wasn't super lauded before the season. There were like 25.
No,
that was the weird year.
Exactly.
That was the shortened season too, right?
Yeah, the COVID year, and the Alabama quarterback was like you said, it was like Andy said, he's like 20-1.
Yeah,
it's like, what are we doing here? Like, if there's any,
let's take that. Yeah,
even gave everyone COVID, so we knew they weren't going to deal with COVID.
All right, let me ask you a fun one about this year coming up because I'm curious. So Georgia finally breaks through last year. That was like the best defense we've ever seen in college football, or at least in the top 5. Andy was on that corner, and I was like, all right, we'll see about that. And ultimately, their performance in the national championship
I think it's
game
close to
was
that.
amazing. How would you line 2021 Georgia versus 2022?
Well, let me ask you a follow-up. Are we saying they played week 1, or are we saying like the end of the 2022 team plays the end of the 2021 team? Because I think it could be vastly different once these 5-star defenders that are all new starters kind of come into their own.
Yeah. And it basically last year's championship team is waiting for them if they win the semifinal.
I think today, here's what I think Georgia's offense is going to be better. And I think the D is going to be worse, at least early on, by a decent amount. So I think today, I would say the D's maybe a touchdown different. I mean, like you said, it was one of the best defenses of all time. I mean, how many draft picks did they have in the first round?
6?
Like 5,
All
6?
of them. The whole damn team's playing on Sundays now.
There was a couple guys that were expected to go in the first round that slid, but yeah.
So today,
5 or 6. Yeah.
I think I would make even though this year's offense is going to be better, their offense last year was still pretty good. I think today I'd make it somewhere just under a touchdown, maybe like 5.5, 6. And then into the season, I think it likely gets closer, probably closer to a field goal. But unless that Georgia offense this year is just electric, which I think it could be if you look at a lot of the players that they have and who they return, I think I don't know if it'll ever get better than a field goal.
Wow. Interesting. Oh,
what do you guys think? I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is all like pontificating on.
I have zero. I haven't done zero. This is my research for this season so far, bud. Like, this is where I'm at. No,
I didn't know they were that loaded coming back. Honestly,
they are. I did because I talked to Dan. Like, I talked to producer Dan about him, and he kind of said the same thing. He said there's a lot of really, really high end prospects, but you get to find out, like, was it the players or was it the coaches? You know, a combination of the players and the coaches. Did the coaches get that, you know, that defense to do that last year? And if that's the case, they probably could do it again with these guys. This defense can be really, really good again. But again, I'm still on the podium there of that was the best defense I've ever seen. And the LSU team from a few years back was the best offense I've ever seen. So you don't you don't even have to go back that far to like see the best of all time anymore.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I have a fun question for you. So are there a couple of early in the season games that you have circled where you're probably not going to have a bet because you're a little unsure or curious or not, you know, like there's questions that need to be answered about a couple of key teams, but you're like, okay, we are going to learn a lot from that matchup, like Georgia, for instance, playing, who do they play early? Oregon?
Oregon week 1.
Yeah, like are there a couple of games like that where you're not going to have much action or you are going to have action and you're like, but you got it circled like we're going to learn something important about these guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one right away we'll get a sense that you mentioned what we're going to see from both of Georgia's D. Like, are they just they're going to reload? The question is how quickly, and what is Oregon actually going to look like with a new coach? I think early on, you have Miami going to Texas A&M in week 3. I think that's going to be a really good one to see just how good A&M could be, and where we're at on Miami and this turnaround. I think week 1, Purdue versus Penn State. You got 2 teams that kind of finished the year going in different directions there. I think we'll learn a ton about both of those teams in that one. I think Pitt, Tennessee, and week 2 is a big one. You know,
that was a great game last year, right?
Yeah, it was a good game last year. Tennessee's getting a lot of hype. That was kind of Pitt's. I mean, I think that was after they lost to Western Michigan, or maybe it was before. So I think that'll be a good one to see. Is Western Michigan, going to fall off? I think right away, Ohio State, Notre Dame is an interesting one. And I'm not sure I'm going to have action. Oklahoma, Nebraska, week 3 is a great one to see, where we're at on the new coaching staff for Oklahoma and what, Nebraska is doing with a new offensive coordinator and what, is the proverbial Scott Frost hot seat that just seems to continue. So I think there's a lot of those types of games where we'll get a sense for what these teams are pretty quickly early on. But I think the bigger goal is figuring out, maybe a team that underperforms in one of those games on the scoreboard, is that representative of who they're going to be for the whole season or not?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
September
Those are
3rd, Drew. September 3rd, FAU at Ohio. Frank Solich Field is unveiled. That's they named the field after him. This is my favorite team now. I'm a Bobcats guy. Because actually,
Are
what
you?
I should I should like actually pay attention to the Gophers this year. Oh, there's my question. Like I seen some people floating that around. Is there a chance Minnesota wins the West up in my neck?
Yeah.
Now that we have this huge TV deal. I'm not sure if you heard the Big Ten's kind of a big deal.
They are a big deal. 6-1. And I when I was going through my previews of the Big Ten, I don't think I'm trying to remember correctly. I have a lot of them, but I don't think I have a single win total bet on anyone in the Big Ten. If I do, it might be Purdue under, but I was trying to figure out who I liked to come out of the West, and I kept coming back to Minnesota. But the reason I'm like, never fired on it is they go to Michigan State, they go to Penn State, and they finish the year home against Iowa and then at Wisconsin. So while I like them on paper, I think the schedule's pretty challenging. But I also don't love Wisconsin this year either. So I kind of found myself in like this going back and forth with what I thought on the West and kind of just put my hands up at the end. And I don't really know what's going to happen, but there's 3 or 4 teams there between Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska that I think all could win the West.
Andy, Paul Bunyan's axe is coming home.
Well, that's the thing. We have low of the peg, the jug, and the axe. If we can get like one of those, that's just like, we got a trophy this year. That's the beauty about being in like these rivalries from a million years ago. Like you don't need to win the national championship to get a trophy. We can get this bronze peg if we beat Iowa.
Yeah, the Gophers fired the offensive coordinator too. That was like Flex Buddy, who last year they're the only teams that ran the ball more than Minnesota last year, with Tanner Morgan, who's been the quarterback for like 10 years, were the academies. So now, like I think they're going to open it up a little bit. They have a quarterback that's been there for like 5 years. It's the same OC, Kirk Ciaroca or whatever his name is. He's back. And he was the last time that Minnesota had that really good offensive passing game. I think it was like Flex second year or something like that. So there's a lot of reasons to like the Gophers this year, I think.
God, maybe I'll have to go to a game. I like it. Campus is fun. I haven't. Last time I went to a game, it was a Wisconsin game, and literally like my beer froze. Like
this is on the Saturdays. That's your family day, right?
Yeah, I know. And that was a thing too. Like this is. I'm not even sure if I had kids. Oh, so somebody gave us tickets. So like, fuck it, we'll go. And then you get there, and it's like a month later, and it's like 17 below zero, and literally my beer froze. I'm like, this isn't any fun at all. I'm gonna go to like a September game. I got this. I got it all figured out this year.
I like it. We got to ask on behalf of our resident Longhorns fan, producer Dan. Are they going to cover versus Bama week 2? You think?
I think what is that look ahead? I think it's like 18.
Sounds about right.
It's a bunch.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. It's challenging. If Saban doesn't want them to cover, they're not going to cover. And I have a feeling that could be a statement game for the Tide. And I like Texas. I just think next year's Texas is back here. I don't know if it's quite this year yet.
We'll delay it to perpetuity. It's already been delayed, I think, about 8 years. So a couple more, and who cares? Are there any other teams that we haven't mentioned that you think are like market is just kind of broadly way off that without giving away all the goods?
No, I'm happy to get into any of it. I've seen some people have NC State power rated top 5 team in the country, which to me is insanity. I think they're a good team. I just when you look at the talent that they have, they do have a lot of returning starters, but you're never going to turn a guy that was, or a whole team of basically high 3 stars into Alabama. Just isn't going to be the case. I think people are a little high on them. I'm not saying they're not going to be a 10-2 type team, but I think against the market, they probably will be, I would say, middling against the spread. I think Texas A&M is getting a lot of hype for recruiting, 18-year-olds that still aren't on campus or just coming onto campus right now. That probably won't have much of an effect on the team, and they still have Jimbo Fisher calling the offense. I think USC, while probably going to be exciting, their defense is nowhere near ready, and I'm not a huge Alex Grinch fan as it is. So I think those are a couple teams that I probably would say I'm down on versus the market, and I think underrated. I would say Penn State is one of them. I mean, they were, I think, undefeated going into that Iowa game when Sean Clifford, they were up, I think it was 20-3 or 17-3 when Iowa knocked out their starting quarterback, came back and won the game. And then from there, the rest of the season, Penn State kind of fell off a cliff. Once again, a team that recruits pretty much in the top 10, has a lot of talent. I wouldn't be surprised if you see them knock off one of the Big Ten East teams this year, one of the bigger ones. Oregon, kind of similar. I think people have kind of forgotten about them, but they're a really, really solid team. Still have a lot of the guys, most of the guys that were recruited when they were bringing in top 5, top 8 classes. You can kind of go off the beaten path. The team that changed coaching staffs this year, that recruits at the top of their conference, is like a team like Troy that I think, we just got used to them being at the bottom of the conference. But, if they have good coaching, it can very easily, swing back and be at the top of their conference. So I think there's a lot of teams that, if you look at the AP poll, you look at it and you're like, that just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Andy's muted, but
I was switching tabs there. Quick, we'd be remiss not to get a Utah take. That's been a hot potato.
A lot of people like that over.
Yeah, I don't dislike this Utah team. And obviously Cam Rising coming in to, let's call it whatever that was, halfway through week 3/week 4 last year, changed the tune of that team. And by the end of the year, I had them pretty much playing at the caliber of a playoff team. But I find it hard losing what I think is probably their best playmaker on the offensive side of the ball in Britton Covey. And then losing a couple NFL guys on the defensive side of the ball. It just isn't that easy, I don't think, for a team like Utah to, plug and play and replace those types of guys. So if I had, the win total is 9. If I had to make a play on it, I think it's going to be a push at 9. I would lean under if I wanted to make a play on where I thought the value would lie. They go to the Swamp in week 1 at Arizona State. While people are down on Arizona State, it's not an easy place to play. And the guys that are still there probably want to beat Arizona State at this point. They go to UCLA. They go to Oregon. It's not, I would say, too unlikely to see them struggling. I still think they're a top probably 12 team, but I don't think they're, a top 4 team at the end of the year.
Okay. They're no Fresno State, who are the real kings of the West, right?
Yeah, they could be pretty sneaky this year. I don't know if sneaky's if everyone is expecting it at this point, but it's a big deal that they had I think some continuity in who they brought back as a coach, and on the offensive side of the ball, and the defense is good. I wouldn't be surprised to see them beat USC in week 3.
Ooh, that's a hot one. I like that.
Yeah, I bet that too, Drew. I just need them to win their conference games. That's fine with me.
One of our originating friends is very high on them for Mountain West, and he's sending us clips of the offensive lineman practicing. He's like, "Yes, he's back in practice." I'm like, "All right, man."
Again,
go.
I'm not a West Coast guy. The beauty of betting on one of these, I love having a future on a West Coast team. I don't have to sweat any of the games. I won't watch them. They start too damn late. I'm old.
Yeah. That's a fun. Mountain West is a fun conference.
Yeah, it's and like you said, Nevada coming back to earth, that opens things up a little bit, which is fun. God,
is that my favorite conference now, Drew? Like, if I'm going to pay attention to that in football, and my God,
I think so.
Like, do you remember the college basketball at the end of the year with like they had like 4 or 5 really
Oh
good
yeah, that
teams.
was really, really, really
Mountain
high
West,
quality.
like,
Oh
this is-
yeah.
Maybe it's well, not only that, but they're not losing multiple teams to my Big Ten, so maybe they are the true king of the West as far as conferences. No more conference of champions there, Walton.
I love it, man. Well, we'll wrap it up here. Appreciate all of your time. And I always love learning about, originating in sports that I'm not actively involved in. And, appreciate you being so candid about that. So that was very cool. And best of luck this college football season. Where can people find your stuff?
I would say you can follow me on Twitter, the Tailgate Tent, and then from there you can redirect. I have a Patreon site if you're interested in. Obviously, there's a pick service there. The picks come with full write-ups and breakdowns of how I see things, and then beyond that, there's box score reviews, statistical analysis of what I look at every week. Deciding how I'm going to play a game, tons of stuff like that. So if you're interested, feel free to join or shoot me a message if you want more information. So that would be where it is.
Well, right on. Andy,
yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube, it's right in the goddamn screen, guys. At the Tailgate Tent on Twitter. It's I don't follow that many college football guys either. So, but he comes with the deep dive seal of approval as like one of the 6 college football people I follow. So go follow him on Twitter for sure and check out if you're looking for more stuff. Sounds like he's doing plenty of work.
Yep, absolutely. And best of luck this college football season.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Love it, man. I'm ready for week 0.
Yeah, week 0 always sneaks up on a guy.
Let's fucking
I'm
go.
trying to think of, so like if it's in Ireland and if it's at a normal time.
It's 9:30 a.m. my time.
Oh, so that's
Are
just
we allowed to talk now?
Yeah, no, yeah, we
well, still, it's sort of course. Don't give away anything.